One gloomy day, you went out to lunch with some friends, and all of a sudden, when that conversation starts becoming a laughing and bellyache type of conversation, you then felt a shake, and you look over and see the building start tumbling down to the ground. You then look further into the distance and see the water rising as tall as the building you are in. You start to get nervous and don't know what to do, but then you remember the technique your therapist told you to do the next time this natural disaster happens. She said, count to 3 and find a safe way to get out and worry about yourself first. The evidence that is going to be crucial to finding out the amount of survivors that have been impacted by mental health will be found in various ways. One of the ways I have evidence on mental health from the survivors was mainly articles on the survivors' stories and how they were impacted. The first article I wanted to give a shout out to is learning from conducting mental health research during the 2004 tsunami in Tamil Nadu, India. This article made me realize that mental health is being impacted by every natural disaster that happens. This article explains the psychosocial aspect that tsunamis have on people in that area. The main point I got out of this article was that people felt unprepared as well as not enough support. The group that was quick to help out and assist people who were struggling was a SCARF, which stands for Schizophrenia Research Foundation. This helped the victims who were impacted from the tsunami. The language barriers and the cultural difference didn't help them to complete the research that they wanted to. Not only was there poor communication, but also the lack of organization by the researchers that impacted this. These researchers are trying to inform others about these barriers that had experienced. After reading this first article, I started researching more on not only tsunamis, but earthquakes as well, and that is where my next article comes in. The next article I found was Relationships Among Personality, Coping Style, and Negative Emotional Response in Earthquake Survivors. This article helped me realize that different people can cope different ways, and not everyone will go to therapy after a tragedy, but they eventually learn how to cope with the problem. This article is one of my favorites this far in this process for answering my research topic. This article focuses on the emotional effect that earthquakes have on adults that are now known as survivors. These survivors were one who saw many disturbing things that they can't unsee. These things can allow them to take an emotional downfall for the rest of their lives. There are two groups, the high negative emotional response and the low negative emotional response. The group of people in the high negative emotional response had the traits of avoiding problems that had come their way. The main reason for this article was to help authorities find ways to reduce the negative emotional response rates in earthquake survivors. Even after researching about tsunamis and earthquakes and the mental health that has been impacted, I couldn't stop there. I did some more research and found out more about what we as Americans can do in preparation for a natural disaster. The next article I found was Mental Health and Psychological Response After the Worst Natural Disaster in the History of the Maldives. This one article was by far the most rewarding articles of them all. It talked about the Maldives can do in preparation to help other countries get it together. This article's main takeaway was that communication across the islands in the Maldives would have been helpful for this disaster. Most of the islands were affected by flooding except for 9 islands. These 9 islands were only partially flooded. During the tsunami, not a lot of lives were lost, but everyone was affected by this tragedy. This disaster has had the most impact on me because they finally took charge and got help for the survivors who were witnessing mental health issues. This was offered by locals who didn't have a language deficit or cultural shock going on. In the Maldives, they are offering long-term mental health plans for people who are affected. These are great things that follow under the affinity space meaning. After all of this research, I want the audience to write down their action plan to be prepared for a natural disaster at any given point. Find the techniques to help PTSD patients or even the ones who are struggling with their mental health after disaster. I hope that you enjoyed this video and see you next time on the Mental Health channel.